The thing you almost walked into last year would have broken you. Not slowly. Not in the way storms wear down a cliff over centuries. It would have shattered something central, something load-bearing inside you, and you would have spent the next decade trying to locate which piece went missing and why nothing you built afterward could hold weight the way it used to. You did not walk into it, and you do not know why. You think you hesitated. You think the timing just did not line up. You think it was coincidence, or bad luck, or one more example of the universe failing to cooperate with your plans. But it was none of those things. It was me, standing between you and a collapse you could not see, because the entrance was decorated to look exactly like the thing you had been praying for. I blocked it, without your permission, without your understanding, without giving you the explanation your mind has been demanding every day since the door refused to open. And I know what that cost you. I know the nights you lay flat on your back, staring at a ceiling that offered nothing, running through every version of the question, why did that fall through? And I know that every version of the answer you reached was wrong, because every version ended with something being wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. Something was wrong with what you were walking toward, and the only tool precise enough to stop your momentum without injuring you was the one instrument you have grown to resent the most. The pause. The unanswered stretch. The season where heaven seemed to go silent right when you needed a voice the most. I know what that silence has cost your body. The tension you carry between your shoulder blades that was not there 2 years ago. The shallow breathing you do not notice until someone asks you to take a deep breath, and you realize how long it has been since your lungs fully expanded. The exhaustion that sleep does not repair, because it is not your muscles that are tired. It is your expectation. Your hope has been running a marathon with no visible finish line, and the fatigue of that effort has settled into places you cannot stretch or massage or medicate away. I see all of it. I see the mornings you got dressed and drove to work and smiled at coworkers and answered, "How are you?" with the same 5-letter word you have been using for months, while something inside you was reciting a different answer entirely. I see the evenings you came home and stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary, not moving, not thinking anything specific, just standing there, because the act of transitioning from the public version of yourself to the private one requires a kind of energy you are running out of. And I see the prayer you have stopped praying out loud, the one that used to have full sentences and specific requests and amen at the end. It has been shrinking for months. Now it is barely a sentence. Some nights it is just a name. My name. Whispered without direction, without structure, without expectation. Just the sound of someone calling out to someone they are no longer certain is listening. I am listening. I have been listening to every syllable, including the ones that never made it past your throat. And I am going to walk you through what has been happening behind every door that stayed locked, beneath every silence that felt like abandonment, inside every month that seemed to produce nothing. Because this season has not been empty. It has been one of the most active periods of my involvement in your entire life. You could not see it because the most critical work was being done in rooms you were never meant to enter during the construction. But before I show you what the closed doors were guarding, I need to tell you about a man named Paul, who learned what you are learning, and who nearly missed the most important assignment of his life because he could not distinguish between a blocked road and a canceled destination. Paul had a plan, a clear, spiritually motivated, strategically sound plan. He intended to bring the message of Christ into the province of Asia. This was not ambition. This was purpose. He had already seen what the gospel could do in hostile territory, and he knew there were communities in Asia waiting for a word that could change everything. He packed. He prepared. He began walking in the direction every reasonable indicator confirmed was correct. And the Spirit of God said no. Not later. Not gently. Not through a gradual unraveling of circumstances. The text in Acts says the Holy Spirit prevented them from preaching the word in Asia. Prevented. The same word you would use to describe a hand pressed flat against someone's chest, stopping forward motion mid-stride. Paul was walking in obedience, moving in the direction of a genuinely good intention, and God physically interrupted the journey. Think about how that felt. Paul did not have an angel standing in front of him holding a sign that read, "Better plan ahead." He had a closed road and no explanation. He had every credential, every calling, every reason to be walking in that direction, and the only response he received from heaven was a locked gate. So he adjusted. He turned toward Mysia, tried to enter Bithynia. Again, the Spirit did not allow them. A second door shut, a second plan dismantled, a second corridor that looked open from a distance but became a wall when he reached it. 2 rejections in a row for a man who was trying to do the right thing. 2 locked doors for someone who was not running from God, but running toward what he believed God wanted. Now here is what I need you to recognize. In the space between the second closed door and what happened next, there is a gap in the story. The text does not describe what Paul felt during that gap. It does not record whether he questioned himself, whether he wondered if his calling was real, whether he lay awake that night replaying both rejections and searching for the mistake he must have made. But you know what he felt, because you have been standing in that exact gap for months. The space between a rejected plan and an unrevealed alternative. The corridor between what was taken away and what has not yet been offered. That hallway, where the only sound is your own breathing, and the faint suspicion that perhaps you misheard everything. Paul did not misunderstand his calling, and neither did you. The direction was genuine, the desire was real, but the route was wrong, and the timing was wrong, and the combination of a correct calling on an incorrect timeline aimed at an incorrect entry point would have produced an outcome that looked like answered prayer, but functioned like a slow catastrophe. Because what was waiting in Asia at that specific moment was not what Paul imagined. There were conditions he could not assess from outside the province, circumstances that would have consumed his energy, compromised his safety, and most critically, prevented him from being available for something far more significant that had not yet revealed itself. That night, in the place where the 2 closed doors had stranded him, Paul received a vision. A man from Macedonia, standing across the water, calling to him, "Come over and help us." The entire direction of Western civilization shifted on the strength of that single vision, which could only have occurred at that exact location, at that exact time, after those exact doors had been sealed. If the road to Asia had been open, Paul would never have been in the place where the Macedonian vision could reach him. The breakthrough was not waiting at the end of the road Paul chose. It was waiting at the end of the road God revealed after the chosen road was blocked. And here is the part of that story that rarely gets mentioned. Paul did eventually go to Asia. Years later, after Macedonia, after Philippi, after the churches that would produce some of the most important letters in the entire New Testament had been established. The door to Asia was not permanently sealed. It was sequenced. The word was not never. The word was not yet. And the distance between never and not yet, which is invisible when you are standing at the locked gate, contains the entire difference between a story of abandonment and a story of orchestration. your closed door may carry the same grammar, not a cancellation, a sequence, not a rejection of the destination, but a reordering of the route that will eventually include the destination at the moment when you and everything surrounding you can sustain what the destination requires. This is the anatomy of divine redirection, and this is what I need you to hold carefully as I walk you through what has been happening in your own life during the months you have interpreted as wasted. The opportunity that closed 7 months ago, the one that still produces a dull ache when you think about it. You had prepared for it, researched it, positioned yourself for it. You could see exactly how it would solve 3 problems simultaneously. And then it collapsed. Not gradually. The email arrived, or the call came, or the silence stretched past the point of reasonable hope. And you were left standing in the hallway again, hearing your own breathing, wondering what you did wrong. You did nothing wrong. You were walking toward Asia. And Asia, at that particular moment, would have placed you in a position that looked like progress, but would have quietly drained something essential from you. Something you will need for what is coming. The role would have required you to shrink parts of yourself that I have been expanding. The environment would have forced you to adopt rhythms that contradict the pace I have been calibrating inside you. The relationship dynamics in that space would have slowly eroded a boundary you do not yet realize you have been building. A boundary that will become one of the most important structures in the next chapter of your life. You were not rejected. You were intercepted. The difference between those two experiences is invisible from the inside, which is why the pain felt identical to rejection. But interception is what happens when someone who sees further down the road than you can see grabs your arm before you step into the intersection. It does not feel like love in the moment. It feels like interference. But interference and protection wear the same clothes, and you cannot tell them apart until you are standing far enough downstream to see what was waiting in the intersection you never entered. There is another dimension to this season that I need you to understand, and it concerns something that has been shifting inside you so gradually that you have not registered the change. Your definition of enough has been quietly rewritten. Before this season of unanswered prayer, your sense of sufficiency was anchored to external confirmations. A returned call meant you were valued. A financial improvement meant you were provided for. A medical result meant your body was cooperating. An open door meant you were on track. Every data point from the outside world fed a narrative on the inside, and when the data point stopped arriving, the narrative collapsed. But something has been replacing it. In the absence of external confirmation, you have been forced to locate something you did not know you were missing. An interior knowing that does not require evidence to remain standing. You have been developing the capacity to hold steady without a single external indicator that anything is working. This is not stubbornness. This is not denial. This is the rarest form of faith. The kind that cannot be manufactured in seasons of abundance because abundance provides too much evidence. This faith, the kind forged inside you right now, was produced in the furnace of an evidence vacuum. And it is virtually indestructible because it was never built on evidence to begin with. What I have been cultivating in you during these empty-looking months is an immune system against despair. Not the temporary immunity that comes from a single encouraging word or a timely coincidence, a structural immunity. The kind that will allow you to walk through the next 3 decades encountering difficulty, loss, confusion, and closed doors without collapsing. Because your stability was relocated during this season from the shifting ground of circumstances to something that does not shift. I do not change. And the person who has learned to anchor their peace to something unchanging can weather any storm that the world of circumstances produces. That education required a classroom with no windows and no timeline on the wall. It required exactly the environment you have been enduring. The psalmist understood this when he wrote, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." Notice the repetition. Wait, then strengthen, then wait again. The instruction does not promise that waiting will be comfortable or brief. It promises that strength is located inside the waiting, not at the end of it. You have been looking for the gift at the finish line. The gift has been forming in you with every mile. But this interior renovation is not the only work that has been underway. Something has also been happening in the space between you and the people closest to you. And it is something you could not have orchestrated even if you had understood it was necessary. Difficulty shared honestly has a binding power that shared comfort never achieves. The people who have seen you struggle during this season, the small number you have allowed past the carefully maintained exterior, those people are now connected to you through something stronger than shared interests or shared history. They are connected to you through shared vulnerability. They watched you wrestle, and they did not leave. They heard the doubt in your voice on a Tuesday evening phone call, and they did not offer a solution. They simply stayed on the line. And that act of remaining, of witnessing without fixing, created something between you that years of casual friendship never could. These are the relationships that will hold weight in the next season. Not the ones built on pleasant agreement, but the ones forged in the honest mess of this difficult chapter. The delay strengthened the relational architecture around you by revealing which connections were structural and which were decorative. Both have value. But when the next storm arrives, and storms always arrive eventually, you will know exactly which walls are load-bearing. Now I need to address something specific, because I know it has been circling your mind for weeks, and you have not spoken it out loud to anyone. You have been watching someone else receive what you asked for, not a stranger. Someone close enough that their blessing is visible from where you stand. Close enough that you cannot avoid the comparison. And you have been fighting something that you are ashamed of, because the feeling does not match the person you believe yourself to be. You are genuinely happy for them. That happiness is real. But underneath it, in the basement of your honest heart, there is a question you cannot silence. Why them and not me? What did they do differently? What am I missing that they possess? That question is not sin. That question is grief, wearing the only disguise available to it. What you are actually feeling is not envy. It is the pain of proximity to proof that the thing you want is possible, combined with the absence of any indication that it is possible for you. That specific combination creates a loneliness so precise that it has no name in any language I have ever heard a human speak. And the hardest version of this pain comes on Sundays. When someone stands at the front of the congregation and tells the story of how quickly things turned around, how the phone rang on a Wednesday, how the job appeared from nowhere, how the scan came back clean after one prayer meeting, and the congregation applauds, and you applaud with them, and your hands are clapping, but your chest is contracting, because every word of their testimony is landing on you like evidence for the prosecution. Evidence that rapid answers exist. Evidence that other people receive them. Evidence that something about your situation, or your faith, or your standing has disqualified you from the express lane. But I need you to see something you have missed. Their timeline is not your evidence. Their story is not your precedent. The fact that something arrived quickly for someone else does not mean it was supposed to arrive quickly for you, because the destination may share a name, but the road conditions are entirely different. They were not carrying what you are carrying. They were not being prepared for what you are being prepared for. The weight of what I am engineering for your life requires a longer curing time, the way concrete that must bear heavier loads requires more days before it can support traffic. Comparing timelines is like comparing two surgeries by their duration alone. A 40-minute procedure is not superior to a 4-hour procedure. The length is determined by the complexity, the precision required, the number of internal systems involved. Your situation is simply more intricate, and intricacy takes time. That is not a deficiency. It is a reflection of the magnitude of what is being built. There is something else I want to free you from today: the guilt of imperfect waiting. You have been measuring your spiritual performance during this season against a standard you invented, and you have been failing it consistently. You believe you should be waiting with more peace, more joy, more gratitude, more of the serene confidence you see in the testimonies of people who described their own waiting seasons in retrospect, edited and polished and stripped of all the ugly, honest moments that actually characterized the experience. No one waits perfectly. No one endures a prolonged season of uncertainty without moments of anger, doubt, complaint, and the quiet internal scream that sounds like, "I cannot do this anymore." Those moments are not failures of faith. They are the honest sounds that faith makes when it is under load. A bridge that bears heavy traffic groans. That groaning is not weakness. It is the sound of something strong enough to hold what is crossing it. Stop grading your waiting. I never gave you a rubric. I never established a performance standard for endurance. The only metric I have ever used to evaluate your faithfulness during this season is whether you are still here. Whether you still turn toward me, even when turning toward me produces no immediate relief. Whether you still open the conversation, even when the conversation feels one-sided. You are still here. That is not the minimum. That is everything. And I want to address the specific shame that comes with the angry prayers. The ones you spoke into the steering wheel on the way home from a day that offered nothing new. The ones that contained words you would never say aloud in a church building. The ones that sounded more like accusation than worship. You have been carrying guilt about those prayers, as though intensity disqualifies honesty. But I received every one of them, not as an offense, as an intimacy, because the people who speak politely to me at a distance do not know me the way you do. You argue with me the way a child argues with a parent they trust enough to be furious with. And that fury, channeled into my presence rather than away from it, is a form of faith that the comfortable have never been forced to develop. And now I need to show you the difference between two postures that look nearly identical from the outside, but lead to completely different places on the inside. Surrender and resignation sit in the same chair. They wear the same expression. They both involve releasing control. But resignation releases control into emptiness. It says nothing is coming, so I will stop wanting. Surrender releases control into trust. It says, I do not know what is coming, but I believe the hands holding my future are competent and kind. Resignation produces numbness. Surrender produces peace. Resignation closes the door permanently and walks away. Surrender closes the door gently and sits nearby, willing to wait without understanding why. What I am inviting you into is not resignation. I'm not asking you to kill your hope or silence your desire or pretend the longing has evaporated. The longing is holy. The desire is something I placed in you, and I do not remove my own gifts. I am asking you to transfer the weight of that desire from your own shoulders to mine, not to abandon it, to relocate it, to carry it the way you carry a child who has fallen asleep. Still holding them, still moving forward, but no longer expecting them to walk on their own strength. And here is what surrender sounds like in practice. More often than a dramatic prayer on the bedroom floor, it sounds like an ordinary Wednesday evening when you catch yourself planning 3 steps ahead, mentally rehearsing scenarios, and you pause. You take a single breath, and you say, not with emotion, but with decision, "This is not mine to solve tonight." That pause, that breath, that ordinary sentence spoken to no audience is the sound of surrender happening in real time. And it is enough. Habakkuk wrote something during his own season of unanswered questions that has survived 3,000 years because its truth refuses to expire. He wrote, "Though the vision lingers, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay." The strange mathematics of that sentence have always been the mathematics of my kingdom. What feels like delay to you is precision to me. What registers as lateness on your clock is exactly on schedule on mine. And my clock has never malfunctioned. Not once. Not for anyone. Not for you. Isaiah said, "Those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength, not those who receive immediately, not those who are spared the difficulty, those who wait." The strength Isaiah described is not the strength of someone who avoided the struggle. It is the strength of someone who is transformed inside it. Wings like eagles, running without growing weary, walking without fainting. That progression moves from soaring to running to walking, which seems like a decline until you understand that walking is the hardest part. Anyone can soar in a moment of spiritual ecstasy. Running is possible when adrenaline is flowing, but walking, steady, daily, unglamorous walking through a landscape that has not changed for months, that is the most demanding act of endurance a human spirit can perform. And you have been doing it every day, without applause, without recognition, without evidence that the road is leading anywhere. I see you walking, and I need you to know that the road does lead somewhere. You cannot see the destination from this particular stretch because the road curves just ahead, and the curve is deliberate. I designed this section without a visible horizon because I needed you to develop the ability to walk without sight. Where I am taking you will require exactly that skill. You will enter rooms where the outcome is not visible in advance. You will love people whose response is not guaranteed. And the capacity to move forward without certainty, the very capacity this season has been forcing into existence, will be the single most valuable ability you carry into every one of those rooms. You are not being neglected. You are being equipped for a life that requires a tolerance for mystery that comfort could never have produced. And there is one more thing this season has been doing that I want you to see before we go further. Something quieter than the rest. Something you may not recognize until I name it. This season has been teaching you the difference between wanting me and wanting what I can give you. That distinction sounds academic until you have lived inside it. Before the unanswered stretch, your relationship with me was real, but it was shaped by a pattern you did not notice. You came to me with requests. You brought needs. You arrived at prayer with a list, sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken, and you measured the health of our relationship by how many items on the list received a response. When the answers came, you felt close to me. When they did not, you felt distant. Not because I moved, because your sense of proximity was calibrated to output rather than presence. But this long season without output has forced a recalibration you did not choose and could not have chosen voluntarily. Slowly, over months, you began arriving at prayer without a list. Not because the needs disappeared, because something shifted in the reason you were showing up. You started coming not to receive, but to remain. Not to transact, but to sit. And in that sitting, in that purposeless, productionless presence, you encountered a dimension of me that my answered prayers could never have revealed. The dimension that exists independent of what I do. The part of me that simply is. Solomon wrote in Proverbs that, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." Most people read that verse as an instruction about decision-making, but it is deeper than that. It is an invitation to a relationship that does not require understanding as its entrance fee. A relationship where presence precedes explanation, where showing up matters more than figuring it out. You have been learning to show up without figuring it out. And that is not a failure of your intellect. That is the maturation of your faith. Now, I want to speak directly to the part of you that is tired of hearing that there is a purpose in the pain. I understand that fatigue. I understand that there is a point where even true words begin to sound hollow, because the body and the mind have absorbed so many of them without seeing corresponding change in the actual circumstances. I'm not going to tell you to simply hold on. Holding on implies that you are dangling, and you are not dangling. You are standing, heavily, wearily, but standing. And there is a difference between someone hanging from a ledge and someone standing on solid ground in the dark. Your ground has not moved. Your footing has not shifted. The darkness is not a sign of instability. It is simply the current lighting condition of a room that will not remain dark. I want to leave you with something you can carry into tonight. Not a prediction, not a timeline, not a promise that everything will resolve by a specific date. Something better than a date. My presence is not contingent on my explanation. I can be with you fully, permanently, actively, without telling you why. The absence of an answer is not the absence of attention. A father who carries a sleeping child through a storm does not wake the child to explain the weather. He simply carries. And the child, without understanding the rain, without seeing the road, without knowing the destination, rests. Not because the storm is not real, because the arms are. You are being carried. Through every day that felt like crawling. Through every evening that felt like sinking. Through every long Sunday afternoon that felt like the entire world had somewhere to be except you. Not figuratively, actually. The evidence that you have not collapsed under the weight of this season is not evidence of your personal strength. It is evidence of mine. So here is what I am asking you to do in this moment. Not tomorrow. Not eventually. Now. Release the timeline you have been gripping in your mind. The one that says, by this age, by this month, by this year. Let the numbers fall. They were never the framework of my plan. They were the framework of your anxiety, and they have been cutting into your palms for months. And say this with me, not because it will change your circumstances tonight, because it will change your posture. And a changed posture is the beginning of a changed experience. Father, I do not understand this season. I am not going to pretend I do. The silence has been heavy. The uncertainty has been constant. And I have questioned whether you see me more times than I am comfortable admitting. But I am choosing today, not with confidence, but with willingness, to believe that what I have been interpreting as absence has been something else entirely. I release my demand for an explanation before I can trust. I release my timeline. I release my comparison to every other story that looks easier than mine. And I receive, even without understanding, the possibility that this season has been shaping something in me that could not have been shaped any other way. I am still here. That is not nothing. That is my offering. and I trust that you know what to do with people who show up empty-handed and honest. Amen. If that prayer named what has been sitting unsaid in the deepest room of your chest, I am asking you to leave 5 words in the comments below this message. I trust God in the unanswered space. Not as a declaration of certainty, as a declaration of decision, because trust is never a feeling. It is a direction. And deciding to face toward me, even when my face is not yet visible, is the bravest act a human heart can perform in the dark. And if you know someone who has been standing in their own unanswered stretch, someone who has been quietly enduring a season that no one around them fully understands, send them this message. Not with advice attached, not with a follow-up text explaining what they should take from it. Just the message. Let it arrive the way my interventions often arrive, without commentary, without packaging. Just the thing itself, landing in the moment it was meant to land. You have been interpreting this delay as evidence of a God who forgot. But what if the delay itself is the most detailed evidence that you were never out of my sight for a single second? What if the precision of what was blocked, the specificity of what was prevented, the exactness of what was rerouted, could only have been orchestrated by someone who was paying closer attention to your life than you were? You were not forgotten in the unanswered space. You were held there, deliberately, carefully, with both hands. And the same hands that held you in the waiting are the hands preparing what the waiting was always leading toward. Rest in that tonight. Not because you understand it fully, but because understanding was never the prerequisite for peace. Presence was, and I have not left.